Desperate. A cowboy bought the giant Apache sisters at auction and freed them, but they said, "Now we are yours." The sun rose slowly over the vast plains of Texas, casting a golden light over the rolling hills and the dusty roads that twisted through the ranch lands. Out here, life moved at its own pace, steady and measured, the kind of rhythm that made men patient and women strong. Among the few who truly understood this life was a man named Jack Dalton, a cowboy whose reputation for fairness, courage, and kindness had spread across the county.
Jack wasn't a young man anymore. He had weathered the years with a calm strength, and there was a quiet wisdom in the way he moved and spoke.
He loved his ranch, his horses, and the open skies above, but he had also always been drawn to the unusual, the stories that most people passed by without notice. One morning, as Jack sipped his coffee on the porch, watching the horizon glow with soft amber and rose, a letter arrived. It was unusual in itself, delivered by a horse rider who had traveled long distances to reach him. The letter spoke of an auction, one that promised to hold something remarkable, something that many would call extraordinary, even unbelievable. Jack felt a stirring of curiosity he hadn't felt in years. He had attended auctions before, but this one was different. There was a sense of mystery in the way the letter was written, a subtle warning mixed with excitement. Without hesitation, Jack decided he would go. The auction was held in a small town not far from the edge of the desert. Dust swirled in the air, kicked up by wagons and horses, and the townsfolk gathered, chatting in groups, eager to see the rare and unique items up for bidding. Jack dismounted and adjusted his hat, scanning the crowd. Most people were here for livestock or antique items, but whispers floated through the air about two extraordinary women, known as the Apache sisters. They were said to be giants among people, not just in height but in presence. Tales of their strength and grace had traveled for miles, carried by travelers who claimed they had seen them once or twice, each story more amazing than the last. Jack walked slowly through the crowd, his eyes searching, until he finally saw them. The Apache sisters stood at the far end of the auction hall, their heads nearly brushing the rafters. They were striking in every sense of the word, with long dark hair that shimmered under the sunlight coming through the windows, eyes as deep as the forest, and an aura that seemed to command attention without a word. People stared in awe, murmuring to one another, unsure whether to admire them or to whisper behind their backs. Despite the attention, the sisters remained calm, almost serene, moving with a grace that belied their size. As the auction began, items came and went. Rare horses, handcrafted furniture, tools, and trinkets, each drawing enthusiastic bids. But the atmosphere shifted when the announcer finally spoke the words that made everyone sit up straighter. "And now the Apache sisters." A hush fell over the hall, as if the very air held its breath. Jack felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. He didn't know why, but something inside him told him that this moment would change everything. The bidding started cautiously. At first it was just a few people raising their paddles, uncertain, afraid of the attention that came with owning such unique individuals. Jack observed quietly, his mind working. He didn't see them as objects or prizes. He saw them as people. People who deserved respect, freedom, and a chance to live life on their own terms. Every bid that went up seemed to make him more determined. He wanted to ensure they wouldn't end up somewhere they didn't want to be, somewhere their lives would be confined or dictated by strangers. Hours passed, the auctioneer's voice rising and falling in rhythm with the increasing bids. The Apache sisters didn't say much. They simply watched, their expressions calm, yet their eyes spoke volumes. Jack noticed the subtle ways they communicated with each other. A glance here, a tilt of the head there. He understood without words that they were cautious, unsure of what the future might hold. The room was thick with tension, the energy almost electric, as though everyone was aware that this wasn't just any ordinary transaction. Finally, The moment came when Jack raised his paddle. Brit. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in murmurs. "You, sir," the auctioneer called, nodding toward him. "Do you bid?" Jack's voice was steady, clear, and respectful. Brit. "I do." And then the others tried to outbid him, but Jack remained patient, confident, and thoughtful, never rushing, always considering.
He had a limit, but more than that, he had a purpose.
Brit. He wanted to make sure that whoever won, the sisters would be treated with dignity. After several rounds of careful bidding, Jack's offer stood. The announcer called it officially, and for the first time in the day, the Apache sisters turned their gaze fully toward him. Jack felt his heart pound, not with triumph, but with the weight of responsibility. Desperate. He knew that winning them at the auction wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Narration. As the sisters approached, there was a quiet moment of acknowledgement, a silent understanding passing between them. They didn't speak, but their presence was commanding, filled with an energy that made Jack feel both humbled and honored. Jack led them out of the auction hall and onto the dusty road that led back to his ranch. The townsfolk watched, some with admiration, others with disbelief. But Jack paid them no mind. His focus was on the sisters, ensuring they were comfortable and treated with the respect they deserved. The ride back was quiet, punctuated only by the sound of hooves against the hard-packed earth and the gentle wind rustling through the prairie grasses. For Jack, this journey wasn't just about bringing someone home. It was about righting a wrong, about offering freedom where there had been uncertainty, and about forging a bond built on trust rather than ownership. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jack's ranch came into view. The sisters looked around with curiosity, their expressions softening as they took in the wide open spaces, the gentle hills and the quiet beauty of the land. Jack introduced them to the simple comforts of the ranch: fresh water, horses, and a warm place to rest. Though they were giants in stature, they moved with care, showing an awareness of their surroundings and a quiet gentleness that matched the strength in their bodies. Jack felt a sense of relief. The sisters were safe, and for the first time that day, there was a glimmer of peace in the chaotic whirlwind that had brought them together. Despairs. That night, as the stars began to twinkle in the vast expanse of the Texas sky, Jack sat by the fire outside his cabin, thinking about the events of the day. He reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought the sisters to him, on the responsibilities he now carried, and on the journey that lay ahead. He knew that trust couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned. And he also understood that these sisters who had been through so much had their own thoughts, their own will, and their own dreams. If he could offer them safety and freedom, perhaps they could also find friendship and a sense of belonging in this wide-open land.
Little did Jack know the Apache sisters were not ordinary women who would simply accept their new surroundings passively. They were intelligent, strong-willed, and observant.
They had faced life in ways few could imagine, and while they were grateful for the safety Jack provided, they also carried a quiet strength that suggested they would make their own choices, even in this new chapter. The night air carried a sense of promise and possibility, a feeling that the story was only beginning. Jack felt a strange excitement, tempered with respect, knowing that this wasn't just about owning or rescuing. They had a spirit that could not be contained, and perhaps that was exactly what made them extraordinary. As the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees, Jack realized that the day had been more than an adventure. It was the start of something new, a chapter that would challenge his understanding of friendship, responsibility, and freedom. He didn't yet know the challenges that lay ahead, nor the ways the sisters might surprise him, but he felt ready to face whatever came, guided by his sense of fairness, courage, and the belief that everyone deserved a chance to live life on their own terms. And so, under the endless Texas sky, with stars shimmering like tiny beacons of hope, Jack Dalton and the Apache sisters began their journey together. It was a journey that promised not only adventure and discovery, but also a deeper understanding of trust, respect, and the true meaning of freedom. The story was just beginning, and the plains stretched endlessly before them, ready to witness a tale that would be told for years to come. The morning after their arrival at Jack Dalton's ranch began with a soft golden light spilling across the horizon. Birds chirped in the trees, and the scent of fresh grass mixed with the earthy aroma of the nearby stables. The Apache sisters had awakened early, as was their custom, moving silently through the cabin with a quiet grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Though the night before had been filled with uncertainty, the calm and wide-open spaces of the ranch had a soothing effect on them. The sisters, named Nayeli and Ayanna, looked at each other with faint smiles. They did not speak much yet, but their eyes communicated more than words could. They were curious about everything, yet cautious, understanding that while this place seemed safe, it was still unfamiliar.
Jack, meanwhile, had risen even earlier. He moved around the ranch with the familiarity of someone who had lived his whole life in rhythm with the land.
He fed the horses, checked the fences, and made sure the water troughs were full. Yet even as he went about his morning chores, his thoughts were with Nayeli and Ayanna. He wanted to make sure that they felt welcomed, that they knew this was a place where they could move freely, and that their voices mattered. He had always believed that respect and trust were earned, not demanded, and he understood that winning the auction was only the beginning.
Breakfast was a quiet affair. Jack prepared fresh eggs, bread, and some fruit, placing the meal on a long wooden table in the kitchen.
The Apache sisters observed him from across the room. Nayeli was the more outgoing of the two, her curiosity showing in the way her eyes followed every movement, while Ayanna was more reserved, thoughtful, and deliberate in her actions. They had spent most of their lives moving from place to place, their experiences leaving them both cautious and wise beyond their years. They appreciated simple kindnesses, small gestures that indicated someone cared about them as people, not possessions. Jack gestured toward the table. "Eat," he said warmly. "It's good to start the day with energy. You'll need it here." His voice was calm, steady, and full of sincerity. Nayeli approached first, her tall frame bending slightly to fit under the doorway. She took a seat, her movements careful yet fluid. Ayanna followed, her eyes scanning the room, taking in every detail, the arrangement of utensils, the patterns in the wood, the sunlight filtering through the windows. They had learned long ago to notice everything. Survival often depended on awareness. The meal was simple, yet nourishing. Jack shared stories of the ranch, of the horses, the seasons, and the occasional visitors who came from neighboring towns. Nayeli and Ayanna listened, intrigued, but quiet. They had never been in a place so vast and open, where the horizon seemed endless and the air felt lighter than anywhere else they had known. As Jack spoke, they began to understand that life here was slower, gentler, and that their choices mattered. They did not yet speak freely, but the gentle tone of Jack's words, the kindness in his gestures, made them feel that perhaps they could trust this man. After breakfast, Jack decided it was time to introduce the sisters to the ranch itself. He led them outside, pointing to the fields, the stables, and the nearby river that ran through the property. The sisters' eyes widened with wonder. They had seen forests and cities, mountains and deserts, but nothing quite like this. The open plains seemed to stretch infinitely, and the way the sunlight danced across the grass made everything appear almost magical. Nayeli stepped forward, her hands brushing against the tall grass, feeling the texture, the softness, and the life beneath her fingers. Ayanna stayed close behind, observing, taking mental notes of every detail. Jack handed them each a hat to shield their faces from the sun. "Out here," he said. "The sun is bright and the wind can be strong." "You'll get used to it, but it helps to be prepared," The sisters nodded, appreciating his thoughtfulness. Protest. It was small, perhaps, but gestures like this showed them that Jack was considerate, someone who paid attention to their comfort. It was a rare quality, one that the sisters had learned to value deeply. Their first real task on the ranch was simple yet symbolic. Jack led them to the stables, where a pair of gentle horses waited. "These are yours for the day," he explained. "You can ride, take care of them, or just spend time with them."
Horses respond to kindness. Treat them well and they'll trust you.
Nayeli's face lit up with excitement. She had ridden before, but never on such strong, majestic animals. She approached her horse carefully, speaking softly, her hand grazing the animal's mane. The horse responded with a gentle nicker, leaning into her touch. Ayana watched quietly, still cautious. But when she reached her own horse, she too found a connection. It was as though the land, the animals, and even Jack had a way of welcoming them, offering a sense of belonging that they hadn't felt in years. As the morning turned to afternoon, the sisters explored more of the ranch. They walked through the fields, noticing the flowers, the birds, and even the small insects that scurried along the ground. Desperate, Jack followed at a respectful distance, letting them discover the place on their own terms. They climbed small hills, laughed softly at the sight of a rabbit darting across the grass, and marveled at the way the wind seemed to shape the clouds above. Every step, every glance brought them closer to understanding the freedom this place offered, a freedom they had not known before. Yet, despite the calm and beauty, there was still an undercurrent of uncertainty. Nayeli and Ayana had grown accustomed to caution. They knew that appearances could be deceiving, that not everyone had good intentions. They watched Jack carefully, noting his reactions, his patience, and the way he respected their space. Slowly, they began to sense that he was different. He did not see them as curiosities or trophies. He saw them as people with thoughts, feelings, and choices. This realization was powerful, and it laid the foundation for trust. By late afternoon, the sisters had grown more comfortable. Nayeli began to speak in short, deliberate sentences, asking questions about the land, the animals, and the routines of the ranch. Ayana was quieter, but she contributed in her own way, offering observations and insights that showed a deep understanding of the world around them.
Jack listened patiently, answering their questions with honesty, never underestimating their intelligence. The exchange was simple yet meaningful, building a bridge between their past experiences and the new life they were beginning to imagine.
As evening approached, Jack suggested a walk to the river. The sisters agreed, curious to see the water and the life surrounding it. They followed a narrow path, the soft earth cushioning their steps, and soon the gentle flow of the river came into view. The sunlight reflected off the rippling water, creating a sparkling effect that mesmerized the sisters. Nayeli knelt by the edge, dipping her hands into the cool stream, while Ayana watched the movement of the fish, her keen eyes tracking every flicker. Jack remained nearby, giving them space while remaining a quiet presence of safety and support. It was during this walk that a subtle shift began to occur. The sisters, who had been cautious and reserved, started to relax. The combination of open space, kind attention, and gentle freedom allowed them to let go of some of the fear that had accompanied them for years. Nayeli laughed softly at a fish jumping from the water, a sound that was musical and genuine, filling the quiet evening with warmth. Ayana smiled faintly, the corners of her eyes crinkling in a way that suggested both amusement and wonder. Jack couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. This was more than a victory at an auction. It was a beginning of connection, trust, and perhaps even friendship. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, Jack led the sisters back to the ranch. They moved with a new ease, their steps lighter, their expressions softer. Brit. Dinner was simple but hearty, shared around the same wooden table from breakfast. Conversation flowed more freely now. Brit. Nayeli asked about the history of the ranch, the seasons, and the animals, while Ayana commented on the way the wind shaped the hills. Jack responded thoughtfully, never rushing, allowing them to express themselves fully. Brit. It was a quiet but profound bond forming, built on respect, curiosity, and shared experience. Later that night, as the sisters settled into the guest cabin, they reflected on the day. Brit. It had been filled with new sights, sounds, and sensations, each one shaping their understanding of the place they now called home. They realized that Jack's kindness was not superficial. It was genuine, rooted in a deep respect for others and a belief in fairness. Brit. They felt a spark of something they hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that here, in this wide and open land, they could live freely, make choices, and perhaps find happiness on their own terms. Brit. And so as the stars emerged once more in the Texas sky, the Apache sisters drifted into a calm sleep, their minds alive with possibilities. The ranch, with its endless fields, flowing river, and gentle rhythms, had begun to weave itself into their hearts. They knew challenges lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while they felt a sense of belonging. Jack Dalton had offered them more than shelter. He had offered trust, patience, and respect. Brit. And in return, they would begin to discover what it meant to be free, not just in body, but in spirit. Brit. The next morning, the sun rose bright and warm over Jack Dalton's ranch, spilling light across the wide open plains. The Apache sisters had slept soundly through the night, though they were awakened by the gentle crowing of a rooster and the faint rustling of leaves in the morning wind. Brit. Nayeli and Ayana stretched carefully, moving with grace despite their height. For the first time in a long while, they felt unhurried, free to take the day as it came. Brit. The ranch seemed alive in a way that cities never were. Soft birdsong, the low whinny of horses, and the distant hum of insects created a symphony that made everything feel natural, unforced, and alive. Jack had already risen as usual. Brit. He was in the stables, brushing down the horses, his movements steady and confident. He noticed the sisters approaching, their long strides bringing them quickly to the barn. Brit. Nayeli was the first to speak, her voice bright but calm. "Can we ride the horses today fully?" she asked, her eyes reflecting both excitement and determination. Jack smiled, sensing the subtle shift in her tone. This was different from the curiosity of the previous day. It was an assertion of choice, a quiet confidence that had begun to grow. Brit. Of course," Jack replied warmly. "You can ride anywhere you like on the ranch. But stay on the paths until you're used to the horses. Safety first. Always." Brit. The sisters nodded, appreciating his guidance but also realizing that he trusted them to make their own decisions. This trust was a rare gift, one that the sisters did not take lightly. Brit. They felt a growing respect for Jack and a desire to prove that his confidence in them was well placed.
As the sisters mounted the horses, Nayeli took the lead.
Brit.
She guided her horse through the fields with practiced ease, the wind tangling her long hair but never slowing her movements.
Brit. Ayana followed, her eyes keenly observing every detail around her. The way the sun glinted on the grass, the shape of the clouds, and the sounds of wildlife that filled the morning air. Jack watched them from a distance, marveling at how naturally they adapted to the rhythm of the ranch. Brit. There was a strength in them that was quiet yet undeniable, a resilience born from years of experience and careful observation. By mid-morning, the sisters had explored most of the nearby fields and the edge of the river. Brit. Nayeli began to experiment with guiding her horse over small hills, feeling the rise and fall beneath her, while Ayana discovered a narrow trail leading to a grove of trees near the riverbank. She motioned for Nayeli to follow, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of discovery. Brit. Jack followed behind, giving them space but always remaining close enough to ensure their safety. The sisters were not reckless. But they were confident, testing boundaries while respecting the land and the animals around them. Brit. During this exploration, Naeli spotted a small abandoned shed near the grove. Its wood was weathered and the roof leaned slightly to one side, but there was a sense of charm in its quiet solitude. Brit.
Let's see inside, she suggested, curiosity shining in her voice. Ayana nodded, though she remained cautious.
Brit. Together they approached the shed, examining the lock on the door. It was old and rusty, but with a gentle push, Naeli opened it. Desperate. Inside, dust floated in the sunlight, streaming through cracks in the walls. The sisters peered around, noting the old tools, remnants of wood, and a faint, earthy smell. This small discovery sparked a sense of adventure in them, a chance to explore and claim a small corner of the world on their own terms. Jack arrived shortly after, observing the shed and the sisters' excitement. This used to be for tools and supplies, he explained. Not much use now, but it's yours to explore.
Just don't disturb the structure. It's old and fragile. The sisters nodded, grateful for his trust and guidance.
They spent the next hour examining the shed carefully, moving items aside, imagining ways it could be used, and discussing quietly what each artifact might have been. There was a playfulness in their actions, a joy in discovery that Jack hadn't seen in many people.
It reminded him that even extraordinary people still cherished simple pleasures and the chance to shape their own space. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the sisters returned to the main ranch area, their hair slightly tousled from the wind.
Jack suggested a break under the shade of a large oak tree near the house. They settled on the grass, enjoying the cool shade and the gentle breeze. Naeli began to speak more freely now, asking Jack about the animals, the routines, and the work required to maintain such a vast property. Ayana, quieter but equally attentive, listened and interjected occasionally, sharing thoughtful observations about the land and its rhythms. Jack answered with patience, explaining the daily chores, the seasons, and the care needed for the horses, cattle, and crops. By late afternoon, Jack introduced a new challenge, helping with the harvest of a small vegetable patch near the ranch house. To speculate. It was simple work but required coordination, attention to detail, and patience. The sisters approached it with focus, their height giving them an advantage in reaching the tops of some plants, while their careful movements ensured that nothing was damaged. Jack watched, impressed not only by their physical strength but by their intelligence and ability to adapt. He had assumed he would be teaching them simple routines, but it quickly became clear that they were capable of learning quickly and contributing meaningfully to the work around the ranch. The day continued with small adventures and exercises, each designed to help the sisters feel more at home while also testing their abilities. They learned how to gather eggs from the chicken coop, feed the horses, and even help with minor repairs around the barn. Naeli showed a natural talent for calming the horses, while Ayana demonstrated patience and precision in handling delicate tasks. Jack felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was not merely about teaching or guiding them, but about witnessing their growth, their independence, and the confidence that began to emerge in subtle, powerful ways. As evening approached, the sisters suggested a walk along the ridge overlooking the valley. Jack agreed, sensing that they wanted to experience the view in their own way. Together they climbed the gentle slope, feeling the wind on their faces and the grass beneath their feet. From the top, the entire ranch spread out before them, a patchwork of fields, pastures, and river bends glinting in the fading sunlight. Nael and Ayana stood quietly for a moment, taking in the sight. The silence between them filled with awe and reflection. Jack observed from nearby, feeling proud yet humbled by the moment. It was not just the beauty of the land that captivated the sisters, but the sense of freedom it represented, the ability to move, choose, and experience life without restraint.
It was during this walk that Naeli spoke a sentence that surprised Jack.
We appreciate all you've done for us, but remember, we make our own choices here too. Her voice was calm but firm, carrying a quiet authority that Jack had not yet fully encountered. Ayana nodded in agreement, her expression resolute. Brit. Jack smiled, understanding fully. This was exactly what he had hoped for, not obedience or compliance, but mutual respect. Brit. They had begun to assert themselves, expressing their thoughts and opinions while acknowledging the guidance he provided. Brit. It was a sign of growing trust and maturity, and it filled him with a sense of hope for the future. As night fell, the sisters helped Jack with the final chores of the day, carrying water, feeding the animals, and preparing a small fire for warmth. They moved with confidence and ease, their earlier caution replaced with a quiet determination. Dinner was shared outdoors under the stars, the cool night air filled with the gentle sounds of the ranch, crickets chirping, wind rustling leaves, and the occasional call of a distant owl. Conversation flowed naturally. Laughter peppered the quiet moments, and a sense of connection deepened. Jack realized that these women, extraordinary in many ways, were becoming part of the rhythm of the ranch, their presence enriching it in ways he had not anticipated. Before retreating to their cabin, Nayeli and Ayana paused at the edge of the field, looking up at the endless night sky. Stars shimmered like tiny lanterns, and the vast expanse of the plains seemed to stretch into infinity. They exchanged a quiet smile, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had begun. The world was wide and full of possibility, and here, on this ranch, they had found space not only to live but to grow. Jack watched from a distance, understanding that this was only the beginning. Trust, respect, and freedom were powerful bonds, and he knew that the days ahead would test and strengthen them in ways both expected and surprising. As they settled into the cabin for the night, the Apache sisters reflected on the events of the day. They had learned new skills, explored new spaces, and, most importantly, begun to understand that they had choices here. Their presence on the ranch was not a matter of ownership, but of collaboration and mutual respect. The connection with Jack, built on patience and trust, was deepening, and with it came a sense of hope and anticipation. They knew that challenges would come, but for the first time in a long while they felt capable of meeting them, not as captives of circumstance, but as individuals with agency, strength, and freedom. The next morning, the ranch was bathed in soft sunlight, the kind that makes every blade of grass and leaf appear alive. Jack Dalton moved around his property with his usual calm efficiency, checking fences, feeding horses, and ensuring that everything was in order. The Apache sisters, Nayeli and Ayana, had already begun their own routines. Nayeli walked toward the chicken coop, whistling softly to the birds, while Ayana approached the garden patch, examining the rows of vegetables with care. There was a quiet harmony in the morning, a rhythm that seemed natural and comforting, one that both the sisters and Jack had come to value. Jack noticed that today he wanted to introduce a new task, one that was a little more challenging but also an opportunity for the sisters to test their skills and their confidence. "There's a small herd of cattle that wandered closer to the river last night," he explained. "We need to guide them back to the main pasture. It won't be difficult, but it requires patience and teamwork."
Fink, you're ready?
Nayeli's eyes lit up with excitement. "We can do it," she said confidently.
Ayana nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips, though she remained cautious and observant. The three of them mounted their horses and rode toward the river, the sun climbing higher in the sky and casting a warm glow over the fields. The sound of hooves against the earth mingled with birdsong and the gentle rustle of the wind. As they approached the river bank, Jack pointed to the small herd grazing near the water.
They've wandered a bit too far. Let's make sure they move slowly and safely back to the main pasture.
We don't want to scare them.
Nayeli and Ayana took their positions carefully, flanking the cattle on either side. Nayeli used her height to her advantage, guiding the animals with gentle gestures and quiet words. Ayana followed closely behind, her calm presence helping to keep the herd together. Jack moved slightly ahead, watching their movements, offering advice when necessary but mostly letting the sisters lead. Brit. It was a subtle test, and he wanted to see how well they could handle responsibility and work together. At first, everything went smoothly. Brit. The cattle moved steadily, responding to the sisters' careful guidance. Nayeli's voice was calm but firm, her hands gesturing in small, deliberate motions. Brit. Ayana's patience and observation ensured that no animal strayed or panicked. Jack could see that the sisters had learned quickly from the days before how to read the animals, how to maintain control without using force, and how to communicate silently yet effectively with each other. Brit. It was impressive, and he felt a quiet pride in their abilities. However, just as they were nearing the main pasture, a sudden noise startled the herd. Brit. A gust of wind shook a nearby tree, sending a small branch crashing to the ground. The cattle panicked for a moment, scattering in different directions. Brit. Nayeli's horse reared slightly in surprise, and Ayana instinctively reached out to calm her own mount. Jack's voice rang out, steady and commanding. Stay calm. Gently guide them. Don't panic. The sisters quickly recovered, using everything they had learned. Desperate, Nayeli circled her horse to block a few of the more restless cattle, speaking softly to them while guiding them toward the pasture. Ayana moved carefully behind the herd, redirecting stragglers with calm gestures. Jack rode alongside, offering support and encouragement, but allowing the sisters to take the lead. It was a test of courage, patience, and teamwork, and they rose to the challenge. Slowly, methodically, they guided every cow back to the safety of the main pasture. When the last of the herd stepped through the gate, Nayeli and Ayana breathed a sigh of relief. Their faces glowed with accomplishment, and even Ayana, usually more reserved, smiled broadly. Jack approached them, admiration in his eyes. Well done, he said sincerely. You handled that perfectly.
I couldn't have asked for better teamwork. The sisters exchanged a glance, a quiet bond forming between them.
This shared experience had not only tested their skills but had also shown them that they could rely on each other and on Jack without fear or hesitation. After returning to the ranch, Jack suggested they take a break near the river. The sisters dismounted, letting their horses graze while they dipped their hands into the cool water. Nayeli laughed softly as the water splashed against her fingers, and Ayaya watched a dragonfly skim across the surface, fascinated by its delicate movements. Jack sat nearby, enjoying the peaceful moment. The adventure with the cattle had been challenging, but it had also been rewarding, and it left them all with a deeper sense of connection, not just to each other, but to the land itself.
As the afternoon wore on, Jack decided to introduce another small activity, learning to track wildlife. Out here, he explained, you learn a lot from observing animals.
Their tracks, their behavior, even the plants they move through. It teaches patience, attention, and respect. Nayeli and Ayana listened intently, eager to try something new. Jack showed them the faint imprints left by deer near the river, pointing out subtle clues in the soil. The sisters crouched to examine the tracks closely, their eyes wide with curiosity and concentration. Ayana's keen observation skills were particularly impressive, noticing details Jack hadn't even expected her to see. This quiet activity brought a new level of understanding between them.
Jack realized that the sisters were not only physically capable but also intelligent and insightful, capable of learning quickly and thinking independently.
Nayeli's adventurous spirit complemented Ayana's thoughtful caution, and together they formed a balanced, effective team. Jack felt a growing sense of admiration, not just for their strength, but for their character, the way they approached challenges with both confidence and care.
Later, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, Jack invited the sisters to help with a small repair on the barn.
The roof had a few loose boards, And while it wasn't urgent, it was a good opportunity for the sisters to practice working together on a practical task. Nayeli climbed carefully, using her height to reach the boards, while Ayana passed tools and offered guidance. Jack supervised, offering occasional advice but letting them solve problems on their own. It was a simple lesson in teamwork, responsibility, and communication, and the sisters excelled, completing the repair efficiently and safely. As evening fell, they gathered near the fire pit outside the ranch house. The air was cool and the stars began to twinkle in the expanse of Texas sky. Nayeli and Ayana shared stories of places they had visited in the past, their voices animated with excitement and humor.
Jack listened, laughing along, enjoying the rare glimpses into their lives before the ranch.
It was a time of bonding, of shared experiences, and of understanding that this new chapter was not just about survival or guidance. It was about connection, friendship, and trust. Before retiring for the night, Nayeli and Ayana walked to the edge of the pasture, looking out over the fields. The ranch stretched endlessly, a symbol of freedom, opportunity, and life unconfined.
Nayeli turned to Ayana and whispered, "This place, it feels different. Safe, but alive."
We can be ourselves here. Ayana nodded, her eyes reflecting both wonder and determination. Jack watched them from a distance, understanding that these words were more than casual observation. They were a recognition of the transformation that had begun within them. That night, as the Apache sisters lay in their cabin, their minds were filled with reflection and quiet excitement. They had faced challenges, learned new skills, and discovered the strength within themselves to navigate unfamiliar situations. They realized that life on the ranch was not always easy, but it offered freedom, respect, and the opportunity to grow. Jack Dalton had given them more than safety. He had provided guidance, patience, and trust, and in return they were beginning to embrace the responsibilities and joys that came with it. In the stillness of the night, the ranch seemed to breathe with them. The gentle sounds of animals, the whispering wind, and the distant flow of the river created a peaceful lullaby. The Apache sisters drifted into sleep, their hearts lighter, their spirits stronger, and their bond with Jack Dalton and the land deeper than ever before. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new moments of discovery. But tonight, there was a sense of accomplishment, trust, and quiet contentment that filled the air. The next morning, the ranch was alive with energy, desperate. Sunlight streamed across the rolling fields, warming the earth and highlighting the soft movements of animals beginning their day. Jack Dalton was already outside, tending to the horses and surveying the fences. There was a sense of quiet satisfaction in the air, one that came from the rhythm of hard work and the promise of a new day. Today, however, felt different. Not just another morning, but a day that hinted at growth, transformation, and the unfolding of possibilities.
Nayeli and Ayana rose with the dawn, their movements confident and purposeful.
They had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the ranch, the gentle flow of work, discovery, and exploration.
Yet today there was a spark in their eyes, a subtle but unmistakable sign that they were ready to take more initiative, to explore not just the land but themselves.
They dressed quickly and quietly, then joined Jack outside, their tall frames casting long shadows in the early sunlight. Jack greeted them with his usual warmth. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying over the soft breeze. "I thought today we could try something new, something that will test your independence and judgment, but also give you a chance to enjoy the land in your own way." Nayeli and Ayana exchanged glances, curiosity and excitement flickering across their faces. They had learned from the days before that Jack's suggestions were never arbitrary. There was always a lesson, a challenge, and often a reward of discovery, waiting for them. He led them toward a distant section of the ranch that they had not yet explored, a stretch of land bordered by hills, a small grove of trees, and a sparkling creek. "We're going to map out a trail today," Jack explained. I'll guide you at first, but I want you to plan it, observe it, and lead yourselves back. Pay attention to the land, the signs of wildlife, and the safest paths for the horses. Brit. Nayeli's eyes widened with excitement, and Ayana's expression mirrored hers, a mixture of determination and thoughtful anticipation. This was the first time Jack had asked them to take the lead entirely, and both sisters recognized the trust implicit in his words. The journey began with careful steps. Nayeli led the way, her keen eyes scanning the terrain for anything that might be a hazard to the horses or themselves. Ayana followed, noting subtle changes in the soil, the direction of the wind, and the gentle bends of the creek. Jack remained slightly behind, observing silently his presence, supportive but unobtrusive. The sisters moved with a growing confidence, communicating with each other in quiet gestures, subtle glances, and occasional soft words. It was as if they had developed a language of their own, one that combined awareness, intuition, and respect for the land. As they navigated the hills and creek, they encountered small challenges that tested both skill and patience.
A narrow path over a rocky incline required careful coordination between horse and rider. Nayeli adjusted her horse's steps, speaking softly to calm it, while Ayana guided her mount behind her, ensuring that both horses remained steady.
Jack watched, impressed by how naturally they handled the situation. They were not merely following instructions. They were thinking ahead, making judgments, and demonstrating a level of independence that reflected their growth over the past days. Pressure. Midway through the trail, they came across a small clearing filled with wildflowers and sunlight. Nayeli and Ayana dismounted, allowing the horses to graze while they explored the space on foot. The sisters wandered among the flowers, laughing softly at the beauty of the scene, their earlier caution replaced with joy and wonder. Jack joined them, sharing in their delight, but letting them take the lead. It was a quiet moment of connection, not just to each other, but to the land itself. The ranch, with its open spaces and natural rhythms, had become more than a home. It was a canvas upon which they could express themselves, grow, and discover the freedom they had longed for. After a while, Nayeli suggested following a small path along the creek, curious about where it might lead. Ayana agreed, and together they guided their horses along the narrow trail, careful not to disturb the wildlife or the delicate plants along the edge. Jack followed, silently encouraging them as they demonstrated confidence, caution, and awareness. The sisters moved as if the land had always been theirs to explore, their steps deliberate but unhurried, their minds alert and engaged. Along the creek, they encountered a fallen tree partially blocking the path. This obstacle presented a challenge that required cooperation, creativity, and careful planning. Nayeli studied the tree, considering how to guide the horses over or around it, while Ayana examined the surrounding terrain for a safe alternative. Together they devised a plan. Nayeli would lead the first horse carefully over a narrower part of the trunk, while Ayana guided the second horse along a gentler curve of the path. Jack offered encouragement and ensured the horses remained calm, but the sisters executed the solution themselves. The success brought quiet laughter and satisfaction, a shared acknowledgement of their growing independence. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a vantage point overlooking the entire ranch. From this height, the land stretched endlessly, fields, pastures, and river bends glinting in the light. Nayeli and Ayana dismounted again, taking in the view with awe.
"It's beautiful," Nayeli whispered, her eyes reflecting both wonder and gratitude.
Ayana nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And it feels ours," she added softly. Jack stood nearby, quietly observing the sisters' reaction. He understood fully the land was not theirs to own, but the freedom it offered, the choices it allowed, and the space it provided had become deeply meaningful to them. On the way back, the sisters began to take even more initiative. Nayeli led the horses down a winding path she had noticed earlier, her confidence evident in the way she guided the animals. Ayana offered gentle suggestions, her sharp eyes noting potential hazards and subtle changes in the terrain.
Brit. Jack followed, silently proud, realizing that this journey was more than a simple trail. It was a test of trust, communication, and mutual respect. The sisters were not only learning from him, but also demonstrating their own judgment, creativity, and strength.
Brit.
As the afternoon turned to evening, they returned to the main ranch area, the horses calm and content after a day of exploration. The sisters dismounted, brushing the animals and ensuring they had water and food.
Brit. Jack watched quietly, appreciating the way they cared not only for the animals but also for the land itself. It was clear that they had embraced their new life, not as passive participants, but as active, thoughtful, and capable individuals. Brit. Dinner that evening was a quiet, joyful affair. The sisters spoke more freely, sharing thoughts, ideas, and reflections on the day. Brit. They discussed what they had observed, how they had solved problems, and the small victories that gave them confidence. Jack listened, offering insights and encouragement, but allowing the sisters' voices to lead the conversation. Brit. It was a moment of mutual respect and understanding, a recognition that the journey they had begun together was one of partnership, trust, and shared growth. Brit. Later that night, as the stars shimmered above the vast Texas sky, the Apache sisters sat quietly outside their cabin, reflecting on everything they had experienced. Nayeli spoke first, her voice calm and confident. Brit. We came here uncertain, unsure of what to expect, but now we feel free, capable, and respected. Brit.
Ayana nodded, her eyes bright in the starlight.
Brit. We are grateful, she said softly, not because someone gave us freedom, but because we can live it and choose it ourselves. Jack, standing nearby, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had hoped to provide safety and trust, but seeing the sisters embrace their independence, strength, and spirit brought a level of satisfaction beyond words. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day. What had begun as a cautious arrangement had transformed into a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Jack Dalton had not simply rescued the Apache sisters. He had offered them a space to discover themselves, to grow, and to experience life fully. In return, they had embraced the ranch, the land, and the routines with intelligence, courage, and grace. Together, they had navigated challenges, celebrated successes, and built a connection that transcended words. As the night deepened, the sisters finally entered their cabin, the quiet of the ranch surrounding them. Their thoughts were filled with gratitude, reflection, and anticipation for the days to come. They understood now that freedom was not merely the absence of constraints, but the ability to make choices, explore, and grow in an environment of respect and trust. Jack Dalton had given them the chance to experience this, and they had embraced it fully. And so, under the endless Texas sky with stars shimmering like distant beacons, the Apache sisters and Jack Dalton settled into a life defined not by ownership or obligation, but by trust, freedom, and mutual respect. Their journey had begun with uncertainty, but it had grown into something extraordinary, a story of courage, growth, and the quiet power of choice. The land stretched endlessly before them, ready to witness a life lived freely, fully, and together, a life in which each step was guided by strength, wisdom, and the bonds of trust that had been carefully, lovingly forged. The Apache sisters had found their place in the world, not through possession or dominance, but through respect, understanding, and the freedom to choose their path. And Jack Dalton, the cowboy who had welcomed them into his life, knew that their presence had changed him as much as he had changed them. Together they faced the future not with fear but with courage, curiosity, and a sense of belonging that could not be shaken.